welcome. And today, joined by Ant from Supabase, we're here to kind of talk to you about a few different use cases that Supabase and Netlify work together on to really support you as developers as and when you're building website stores and apps. So just to kind of dive in a little bit more detail on introductions. Myself, I'm Stephen Larsen. I'm the VP of Partnerships and Ecosystems at Netlify. Myself and the team, we work with all of our technology partners, such as Supabase, as and when we build integrations. And additionally, I work with all of our agency partners. Some of you may work at an agency, or some of you may partner with agencies as and when you're building projects and products. Love to connect with you. Feel free to use that QR code on the screen there. Connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'm just Steven@netlify.com. Shoot me a note. I'd love to talk to you at any point, get feedback, talk to about particular use cases, any way I can support you as you are building on top of Netlify and with our partners such as Supabase. And Wilson, I'll let you introduce yourself, but co-founder and CTO of Supabase. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, I'm Ant. I'm from Liverpool in the UK originally. I like to call it Auth because people often ask what the strange accent is. So I give you a heads up. And yeah, Stefan asked, am I really in Bielefeld in Germany? I am really in Bielefeld right now. And often found in Singapore, where we actually started the company 2 years ago. So me and my co-founder, Paul, we live together. We're in a tech accelerator together in Singapore. When Paul came to me with this this great idea, which we can dig into a little bit more, hopefully.
Cool, very cool. You might have to prove it. I don't know what's outside that window. Is there some type of landmark that you can prove that you're? Just, I don't know. Maybe if you can recognize Steph, that only you and him can recognize.
If Stefan can recognize that tree. Then.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Just a little bit of housekeeping things. All participants are in listen-only mode. This session is being recorded just for information. We definitely welcome questions throughout. We do have Q&A at the end. If you want to wait till the end to ask your question. Otherwise, please drop it in the chat. Let us know, and we will likely answer it right away. We're even happy to bring up screens and demos and answer things live. Always a dangerous thing to do, but that's kind of the point here is we really want to make this an engaging conversation. So anything and everything you want to know about Supabase, work with Netlify, please let us know via the Q&A in the chat. And last but certainly not least, please respect our community code of contact. If you go to jamstack.org/code of contact, you can read up on that. All right, with that, Ant, over to you. Just kind of set the stage. What is Supabase? Tell us a bit about it and a little bit of the features that it includes for those that may not have used it before or only used part of the platform.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, our tagline has always been that we're the open source Firebase alternative. And the reason for that is actually, so Paul, my co-founder, in his previous startup, was using Firebase, which is one of Google's database products, to build a real-time chat application. So had a few thousand people sending chats. And it's one of those that when you hit a certain scale, it's a NoSQL database, and you start to run into some scaling issues, both from a technical perspective, but also from a maintenance perspective. And as you grow the team, working with NoSQL, so no relation in your database can get kind of tricky. So for a few reasons, he replaced it with Postgres, and then started to build the bits that were missing that he loved in Firebase, which was like the real-time communications, so you can stream changes from the database directly into the client, and a bunch of other things. And so he came to me and he said, people seem to like this. I've put out an early alpha version. Why don't we turn it into a company? And so that's what we did. And what it's become now is effectively a backend as a service, which is all based around Postgres. And one of the reasons I'm here today is because it just does work very well with Netlify. For people who are using maybe Netlify on the front end or Netlify edge functions, then you can just use Supabase on the back end. And of course, like it's fully open source. So if we do offer a hosted platform, but if you want to take it and run it yourself, you also can. It's fully self-hostable. And these are some of the things we offer. So like I said, it really is centered around the database, which is Postgres, which we can dig into a little bit more. But on top of that, we also now have an authentication service, which is a little bit like Auth 0. So you can do your user management, storage service, which is a little bit like S3, Amazon S3. And so you can store files and blobs and stream video, and also edge functions as well. So very similar to actually the Netlify edge functions, which is quite cool. And that's some of the things that make up Supabase.
Very cool. I mean, yeah, you get double the edge functions when you use Supabase and Netlify, as well as the database dedication, storage, and those other components. Maybe we dive in, double click a little bit further, and kind of just understand the architecture a bit, specifically how someone would use Netlify alongside Supabase.
Yeah, so this is kind of just a simple example of using the two tools together. And in this one, if you have written a React application, you deploy it out to Netlify, obviously very easy from the CLI. And maybe you have a couple of edge functions, which has your backend, your business logic, anything you don't want to be in the client. Then you would just, in this case, import Supabase.js, which is our JavaScript library, which wraps all of our backend endpoints. And the top one inside the Supabase square here is the REST API. Now, this is a really cool API, which is powered by a tool called Postgres. And what it does is it basically introspects your database schema and generates out all of the endpoints that you need. So let's say you have a table with students, and then it'll generate a student's endpoint, and then you can just directly from inside the client push data into the database, into the students table, query data out, and it's very powerful because it basically leverages a lot of what's cool about Postgres, like the full text search engine that it's got inside of it. You can just do all of that directly from the client, which is very cool. The next one, like I mentioned, the Auth API. So from your React application, you could just do supabase.auth.signin, pass a username and password, or even trigger a magic link. All of these things, we do it via the Auth API. I mentioned the real-time API, and this is a way for you to stream changes over WebSockets directly into the client, and also the storage API. Now, I mentioned that everything we do at Supabase is fully open source. Actually, at the moment, the exception to that is the fact that storage is basically just a wrapper around AWS S3 right now. So everything goes into buckets on S3, but we're working on expanding that so we can use more open source powered blob storage backends as well. So hopefully that can come pretty soon. Yeah, and it's a React app in this case, but it also doesn't need to be. It can be Next.js or basically anything that you can deploy on Netlify on the front end. You can also just talk to Supabase on the back end.
Very cool. A couple of questions. First and foremost, debate in the chat. How do we pronounce Supabase, Supabase? What was the other one? I think Super, or Supabase. Correct us now.
This goes right back to the very start when we were choosing the name. We wanted to have Supabase ER, but the domain wasn't available, so we had to go PA. but we've always just pronounced it Super, as in super.
Like an
great.
ER. Okay, so like
Yeah,
Supabase. Yeah. Okay. All right, Supabase. Got it. Love it. I think that was what was the majority in the chat. So, all right, good. That's my first question. Second question, why Postgres? I mean, you kind of talked about some of the benefits a little bit, but just double clicking there, obviously a lot of different options, there. But why Postgres, and what are some of the other benefits that you can leverage, specifically as you're working and building your app?
Yeah, someone in the chat said because Postgres is awesome, and that is the main reason.
I mean, yes, it's scalable. There's a lot of it provides a lot of features kind of out of the box, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I mentioned that because it's relational, and we felt that there's a lot of great NoSQL databases, like cloud-based serverless databases available on the web, things like Fauna and Firebase, and we really just wanted a relational version of one of those tools. Then we sort of got asked early on, are you going to do a MySQL version as well, where we just do an abstracted layer above? But we really wanted to dig into what's really cool about Postgres, and one thing is the extensibility. So Postgres has this huge community of people who just produce these amazing Postgres extensions, and some of the cool ones are like PostGIS. So if you're doing anything which is like geo-based, if you're doing mapping or something like that, you just sort of enable PostGIS on your Postgres box, and you just have these new types and all of this amazing tooling for doing that. And a lot of that stuff isn't necessarily available in MySQL as well. The other one, once we started really digging into Auth, we started making use of Postgres's row-level security directly. So if you want to write authentication rules, you just write them in SQL basically. So that's one reason like we do Postgres over MySQL, and then also we're just very philosophically aligned with this idea of open source, and we just felt like Postgres is a little bit more on the open source side than MySQL. It's got the Oracle history and all of that stuff, which just makes it's still open source, but in our brains it was like a little less open source, if that makes sense. And then the last reason, there's a lot of reasons, is that the Postgres development over the last few years has seemed to just accelerate. And I think I don't know whether it's because of people moving like off of Oracle and onto Postgres itself, but there's a lot more companies throwing their weight behind Postgres. And we just felt like the momentum in that community over the last few years has just been like crazy. So it's something we just want to jump on board with, basically.
Makes sense. Why can you specify your own S3 storage in either now or in the future?
Yeah, so if you are running the self-hosted version, you basically have to. So you will connect it to your own S3 service. On the hosted platform at the moment, it's not possible. It could be. I think if we got enough people asking for that, then we could make it pluggable on the platform for sure.
All right. Well, Tom +1 on the feature request there. Another question. What's the difference? Good question. The difference between Netlify functions and edge functions?
Yeah, actually, they're extremely similar because they both use Dino, and we actually spoke to the team at Netlify before we made that decision, because there's obviously a few different options, and we personally went with Dino again because it was open source at the time, and some of the other options weren't at the time we made that decision. And so actually, in terms of as a developer, like writing for both, I think it's basically the same. I think from a like conceptual perspective, like when would you want to use Netlify Edge functions or Supabase Edge functions? I would just say if you're important data from Supabase and you're using it, it's like conceptually closer to the work you're doing with the database, then it might make sense to use Supabase Edge functions. But likewise, if it's more closely related to the work you're doing on your front-end application and you're deploying on Netlify, then it just makes sense to use Netlify. So technically, like not a huge difference, but From an engineering perspective, you might want to choose one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Have you seen, especially running, based off open standards for JavaScript, so forth? What have we seen from customers? Like, is there one reason why a customer use one or the other based off a particular use case or project that they're working on?
Yeah, again, it's mostly about like how, for example, like who is the developer in your team that is going to be building this out? And is it someone who already has access to your Netlify estate? Or is it someone on your backend team who already has access to your Supabase estate? I think that's usually the decision maker in this case.
Yeah. So just choices. That's good. That's good. Okay, I think we caught up to the questions for now. On that point, maybe we dive in a little bit more and talk about some real world examples. Some joint customers of ours.
Yeah. So
kick us off with Mobin.
Yeah. So Mobin, first I'll talk about what they do because it's actually awesome. It's one of those ideas that you hear and you're like, wow, that's so obviously needed. And it's when, designers or developers are building out a new app, is one of the things you most often do is you go to other apps that you like or apps that are close within your industry. And you basically go through the app and you sign up and you take screenshots of everything you see. And then you use it as inspiration and you share it with the team. You might make a slideshow. And with Mobin, they've basically just done that for you for every available app. And so if you're working on a Robinhood competitor, they've already got all of the screens for all of the flows for the Robinhood app in this huge library. So you just sign up and you can just search for basically whatever you want. So it's a really, really cool and useful app and saves designers a lot of time. When Mobin first came to us, I think they had 200,000 developers. And I think they were coming from Auth 0, which when you reach that kind of scale gets really expensive. And they wanted a solution where they own the user data as well. So with a bunch of these Auth providers, if someone logs into your service, actually the data for that user lives in their database. And one of the things we offer is that user data just lives inside your Postgres instance, which is your database, which was an important point here. And so we did that migration, we brought them over, and then the next obvious step was they obviously host a lot of images. So they have this huge library of screenshots. It was just a great use case for Supabase storage. And one of the cool things is, I think we said 90% of the people here are technical, so this feels okay to dive into a little bit, is when you write your row level security rules in Supabase, you can write them so that they also apply to things like file storage. So if a certain user should only be able to access certain buckets or certain specific files or certain folders, you write that directly into your RLS rules in the database. And then that's also connected to the user row in the users table. So it all like fits together quite nicely. So if you are using like the database and file storage and the users API, then they just play together really, really nicely.
And on that point, actually, there's a question related to, beyond row level security. Can you control permissions at the column level?
Yeah, and actually it's actually like Turing complete what you can do with the security rules. So you can basically do whatever you want on like row level, column based, sort of value based. It's just that you need to be careful that if you put too much logic in there, they do get checked every time the data is accessed. So sometimes we've seen it where you write really complex rule sets that call a lot of other functions and it can slow it down. So as long as it's like fast, the specific lookup you're doing, then you can really just do whatever you want in these security rules.
Very cool. How many, what's the total like data set look like in terms of the size for Walben?
It's a good question. I actually don't know off the top of my head, but I know they have like a serious amount of
Sounds like it.
of
Yeah.
apps in there.
Well,
And
I mean,
and I
yeah,
don't know how they keep them up to date as well, because you know, all of these apps are always constantly producing new updates. So I don't know whether the community helps with keeping them updated.
yeah. I mean, just with the screenshot, 72,000 plus screens. I'm not sure exactly the size of those images, but yeah, that definitely packs a punch as that data moves around.
And that's just, yeah, and that's just their iOS apps as well. I think
Oh
they
yeah,
do
I see. Yeah, we're
Android
filtered only to iOS. Oh yeah, yeah.
and a few others. So yeah, definitely performance is important at that scale.
Yeah. That's crazy. Cool. Moving. Oh, I dropped a link to the case study. If anyone wants to read more a little bit about that, I put that in the chat. Next one up, the Stripe of Southeast Asia. Though I am not going to pronounce the name correctly. Zenit?
Yeah, I believe it's Zendit.
Okay.
But yeah, again, like these guys are just operating at some serious scale now. I think it feels like they're onboarding new countries basically every day. But Zendit was one of our first customers, and the specific problem they had was when you're in the fintech like this, they had this requirement that every time a user signs up or a transaction is made, you have this huge database of like known fraudsters. And you basically need to just like reference and check against that database every time a new person signs up. So it was, yeah, so it was a great one for us, because it's just, you can just load all that data into Postgres, have it updated and synced as new known fraudsters get found out and added to the list, and then just have it referenced whenever they need to via API. And I think one thing that made it a really nice project was it was just implemented by one guy, because he obviously didn't need to write the API layer, because we sort of auto generate that out. So it was literally just a case of you load all the data in, you write the query, and then you talk to it from the application. So on just saving number of people, like developer time, it was like a successful project.
Very cool. Very cool. Question on, do you have an example of someone that built apps with team level sharing with permission set per role and team?
Yeah, there's one actually. If you, maybe I'll try and search as we're chatting, but there's an RBAC example, so role-based access control, in our examples folder. Let me just pull that up.
You want to share your screen?
I'll just drop it in the chat, because we have a whole repo of examples. So this is the whole repo. And I believe if you go into Supabase JS v2 folder, there's a Slack clone. This is the one. A Slack clone example app, which I believe has role-based access control schema in the README. So dig into that. There's a lot of code in there. So, oh, there we go. Yeah, if you scroll down a little bit, it's quite a big README, because it has a whole guide. But there's a section which is the database schema in SQL. Keep going. A little bit more. Here, yeah, in the schema here. So the specific rule is in this block. Somewhere, user role at the bottom there, user roles and role permissions. So this is the basic case of writing role-based access control. Yeah, there we go. And we're actually working on some more. I think someone else asked about guides. some more content around this and writing these role level policies, because it is the one where you do need to write some SQL. With a lot of the other stuff, you can do it with point and click in the Supabase dashboard. So like setting up your schemas and setting up your tables and columns and rows. But with the RLS rules, it's much better if you hand write them in SQL, because they're obviously so important to the security of your data.
Yeah, I think another example, it's just something we collaborated on that people can reference and look at the repo. Is matterday.netlify.com, just a little bit of fun what you do next, using Supabase and Netlify together. What would you do with that extra time that you have? And so this entire app is available. Here's the link. Put it in the chat. But yeah, also on GitHub. So feel free to branch that and use that as you see fit, or just dive in and get some more examples. Anything in particular with this kind of demo app that we built together you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think the guys, when they built it, I think they might have even streamed some of it on YouTube. So it's worth, if you want to see exactly, and both the Netlify team and the Supabase team are constantly streaming their builds on YouTube. So there's some great resources there to follow along and get some ideas on like the best way to do certain things. I think our team are streaming every Friday called Supabase Happy Hour. So it's just, again, good to get some inspiration for the best way to build your applications with Supabase.
And that's just through your YouTube account, you're streaming it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. You want to drop the link in there just for people?
Yeah, let me grab that now.
Subscribe and save that, or send a reminder for themselves. And you were on with Learn with Jason a couple months ago too. I think you guys have an example there. See if I can pull that up and I'll drop that in. Can never have enough resources.
Yeah. Is there enough links?
Yeah. Okay, I think let's dive into some more Q&A that looks like it's coming in. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen here for a second. Tom, inviting users to a team for a SaaS is a common pattern. How is this best handled with Supabase Auth? Can you pass along an invite key with the auth process?
Can you pass the invite key along with the auth process? I believe you can. I believe there's it's been a couple of months since I looked at the auth code, but there's a user info property, I think, on the sign up where you can pass arbitrary values and I think store them as JSON on the users table. I might have to check that one.
All right. If Jason's on, he can probably drop the link or the answer to in the chat too. Our Jason, I just dropped in the links that he did with you when building an app with Supabase and Next.js, and then the real-time stuff that you guys did. So 2 videos there that people can follow up on if any of those are of interest. GraphQL. You guys support GraphQL? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a fun story. So we, we always, whenever we onboard new people, we give them the Steve Jobs quote, about you've basically got to say no to a lot of stuff if you want a good product. And the GraphQL thing was something we said no to for the longest time, because we already had our RESTful API. And we're very proud of that, and thought that, that's the best way to do things. And people just kept asking for GraphQL. Oh, are you going to do GraphQL? And then actually one of our engineers, as his kind of fun side project, wrote a Postgres extension, which basically is the GraphQL resolver and GraphQL interpreter, so that you can basically use GraphQL with Supabase and it all happens directly in the database, which means that you don't need to deploy a separate API that lives in between the client and the database. It just lives as a Postgres extension, which we then just felt that was cool enough to do to build a product around then. So we now do have a GraphQL endpoint, which you can work with. Actually, let me just grab that blog. I don't know if we, where is that one? Ah, yeah, this one. It's a pretty good resource because Ollie, who developed it, talks about some of the pros and cons and some of the design decisions as well. So it's quite a good technical read.
A very specific question: would PAWS databases eventually be deleted?
No, they're very cheap for us to store because we basically spin down the database instance, but we've backed up the data. And those database backups are just so cheap to keep around. So we'll keep it as
cold storage. Is that what you do?
Yeah, exactly. And basically, so you can come in a year, 2 years later, spin the database back up, and it pulls in it basically does a PG restore and pulls it back into the database. It's quite funny because anyone who's tried Supabase on the free tier and then you don't use it for a week, they get an email from me, like an automated email from Ant at Supabase that says, "Oh, we're spinning down your database," and it's become like a little bit of a meme with our users because it's like I'm basically guilting you into the fact that you haven't worked on your new project, your new side project. And the funny thing was, I got one myself last week, which was like, "Oh, I'm from Supabase," and it was like, "Oh, we're spinning down your free tier project." So guilting myself into into not working on it.
Hey, but it works, huh? It's a good reminder for people. GDPR and recent rules have made it a bit of a legal nightmare to use hosted services in the EU. Any recommendations? But self-hosting Supabase?
Yeah, actually, for both, if you use Supabase platform and you select an EU data center, we basically are built on AWS at the moment, so you can choose any of the AWS data centers in Europe. Then all of the data will stay within Europe. We just actually finished a large project to move all of our logging and analytics backend also inside of Europe for that reason. So that is good to use. For self-hosting, same thing really. If you self-host on AWS, for example, just make sure you use all resources that are within the EU. And I'm not a legal expert, so I don't want to say that you will then definitely be GDPR compliant, but I think you'll be well on your way.
Yeah, and the question is from a Netlify perspective as well, and the answer there is you will need your own private policy in terms of conditions, since you're the one that are controlling the collection and use of data. We're just hosting it, and what we do host it is in fully compliant with GDPR rules. Cool. Next question: will auth into Supabase dashboard be expanded to username, email, and password, or organization login, or other providers such as Gmail, being restricted to GitHub auth fields limiting?
I got most. Where is that question? I got most of it.
Should be in the
yeah,
top of the Q&A that you see now.
Yeah, we are trying to make it username by default. So it's actually another fun story about Auth is it was originally written by Matt, one of the founders of Netlify, because it's open source. And we always, as a rule, when we're spinning up a new project, we always try and use existing open source tools before we write our own, especially if they've got a good community around them, because then you just already have a bunch of great people contributing. And this was one of those cases. So Netlify had the identity project, which had this awesome Go code base for the Auth API. So we built on top of that. And one of the things we're now changing is it always previously required an email as like the primary identifier, but we're moving away from that so that you can have maybe like a username as primary identifier or mobile phone number or something like this. So that will hopefully change in the dashboard at some point. I don't know exactly when. And then the second part of the question was related to GitHub logins.
Wait, but you do support email, username and email, like email and password today.
Yeah, we support email and password today. We just don't
Okay.
support like username and password. I think in the dashboard is what the question was. Yeah.
Yes, correct. In the dashboard, correct. So will you expand that in the future in terms of an auth perspective into the dashboard?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I can't. Are these questions just in the Zoom chat?
It's in the Q&A. Yeah, in the little Q&A portion.
Okay. I haven't got that open.
All good. Yeah, they're coming
That's
in both
interesting.
chat and Q&A.
Yeah, there we go.
So I'm pulling them from both.
I know what this question is. I know what this question is in relation to. So on our own dashboard,
Yeah.
So we built the Supabase dashboard using Supabase, and on our own deployment, we only have GitHub as an option for logins. Yes, we're about to change it. So within a few weeks, you'll be able to log into the Supabase dashboard with email and password. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool. So coming soon. Love it.
Yeah.
Next question. Would love a simpler way to copy a database schema for dev production and one-on-one testing environments?
We just in the previous launch week announced a new version of our CLI, which has this sort of built in. Let me just grab that. Here's the reference docs. And there's also a blog post available somewhere for how to do this with the CLI, and the experience is actually improving. We still don't have, which we're working on, inside of the dashboard, the ability to flick between your different environments. That's also coming soon. Lots of stuff coming soon. But yeah, that will hopefully be an improved experience in the current CLI.
Cool. I was wondering if there's a way to use edge functions in the CDN when self-hosting. I have no problem paying for an instance for this feature, or is it just not available in this case?
The edge functions should already be available in the self-hosting. If not, then it will be very soon. The CDN probably won't be, because that's mostly just our own infrastructure that we've spun up. So most likely not, but maybe check back in a few months.
Good question in the chat. You can answer it, I can answer it, but the answer is no. But do we compete? I mean, can someone, Supabase a competitor of Netlify? Like, obviously there's overlap with certain features, and pick the best one that's right for you. But at the end of the day, no, we don't compete. But what's your take on that? Like, how should a developer really approach this when they're making a decision? What features at the end of the day they should be using, whether it's from Netlify and/or Supabase.
Yeah, as far as I know, the only thing we overlap on is the edge functions.
Yeah.
And again, my advice for that is, if you're already using Netlify for the front end, then use Netlify for your edge functions. If you're already using Supabase for the database, then also use Supabase for the edge functions. We've really designed it to work together nicely with the database. But if you're not also using the Supabase database, then I would say just use Netlify.
Okay, cool. Questions keep flowing in. Let's keep going. Can you write things like schema or policies from your project with Supabase, or would you need to use something like Prisma?
Yeah, actually, I will share my screen for this one. Just to show it off inside the dashboard. So this was we have like this Airtable like interface. That's kind of the default view. So you can come in here and sort of change your data like you would in Excel. But actually down the left-hand side, we have this SQL editor. And in here, you basically just write all of your schemas directly. And we have, where's that? Welcome. A bunch of templates as well. So it's also a good place to come and learn a little bit of SQL and how to write schemas and things like that. And I think the same Slack clone example that we talked about earlier is all in here. And the cool thing about this is it also has really good auto completion. So I should be able to go countries where, yeah, and you just see all of the auto completion in the editor is quite good. But if you're not so much into SQL, you can also just do it with point and click, designing your schemas with the mouse as well.
Awesome. And obviously using Supabase as the database is a great option with Netlify. Not your only option, but a great option with Netlify. So a good example of that. And actually, I'll drop this post that Phil wrote back in last year, telling you a little more about that.
On that one as well, Prisma also does work very well with Supabase. So and we're starting to work more closely with the Prisma team now as well on just ironing out some of that. So again, I think if you know Prisma well, Supabase is just vanilla Postgres, so you can connect it up fairly easily and use all of your existing code, which is always nice.
Keep on flowing. Love it. Love it. Keep answering your questions, and we're going to get to all of them. Not a Supabase user yet. Love that comment yet. But does it have a native support for .NET Blazor, Larsen, or via or C# API? Or is there a REST API that John could use as he gets going?
Yeah, this is one thing that's super cool about the community and just being open source is the community wrote their own C# client library, which is a wrapper around the REST API. So I haven't used it. I've heard it's very good. So definitely worth a go.
Can you drop a link to that perhaps in the chat for John?
Yes, we'll do that right now. That is.
One of the questions is, would this recording be shared? Yes, we'll send a follow-up email with many of these resources. Maybe not all of them because we're dropping them in a lot, but we'll try to put all these resources for you to access and the recording as a follow-up.
Also, this I'll share the one level up on that link. There's also like really cool like Python client libraries. Someone's wrote a Rust client library, Go, a bunch of others, and they're all community maintained. And the maintainers are just amazing at what they do. So, kind of whatever language or framework you use, you might find a client library in there. I think you're muted, Stephen, but I'm guessing you were asking about the migrations and data changes.
Supabase deal with migrations and data changes during deployments.
Yeah, so we just use some of the standard Postgres tools for this, like DBMate. to migrate up and down. So we just have like a more of a traditional Postgres workflow for this. But we, like I said, in our new CLI, we have some tools to help with that as well. So we don't use our own CLI yet because it's brand new, and we still have a more classic DBMate style migration command that gets run each time we do a deployment ourselves.
Awesome. The CDN question was regarding storage, because I imagine when self-hosting, the content is just not as distributed on your nodes for free.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're self-hosting, one of the things that you spin up is the storage API. And then as far as I know, it's up to you to define how the traffic reaches that API from the clients. Yeah, that's probably all I know about that side on the self-hosting.
Maybe our last question, we'll see. Can you hint at some of your plans for the company and how you're going to continue to innovate at such a pace as you grow? It's slightly concerning building a company on top of a young business that might be gobbled up to Microsoft or Salesforce. Always a great question. Something that many startups and high growth companies are always struggling with, and it's hard to keep that going. To be honest with you, yeah, love your take. This is not about all about Netlify and others, but love your take on this.
Yeah, this one's much more business, like a business question, and one of the forks that a lot of companies like ours face when you sort of get past Series A, once you've proven the tech and proven that you can do like bottom up growth quite well, is you face this next decision of whether to build out your own go-to-market strategy, sales team, that kind of stuff, or to just go inside of a larger company who already has that stuff built out. We've chosen the path of doing it ourselves. So hopefully we will never be inside one of the behemoths that Tom has mentioned there. Because the plan is to basically go all the way ourselves. Some of the future plans is actually around improving Postgres itself. So a lot of Postgres companies, they typically will make a fork of Postgres and make some improvements, and then you end up running a separate branch. I mentioned earlier about like the pace of the Postgres development, and what we've done is we've partnered with a project called Rolebased, which I will also link. And we've hired a bunch of people to basically just work on Postgres core itself. So we hired a bunch of core contributors, and that's how we see like winning in the long term, is we just contribute to Postgres. It stays open source for everyone, and then we build a great company on continuing to do all the go-to-market side ourselves as well. So hopefully that gives you some confidence, Tom.
Well, I agree in what Tom just said. Very cool. It is very cool, and the fact that you guys are making that investment, like truly making the investment and contributing back to the open source Postgres is amazing. Couple more questions. Is there any way to do a database branching in the web app?
Not at the moment, but actually this ties into our Postgres strategy. So we actually want to build that into Postgres itself, which is one of the aims of the OreolDB project. So definitely dive into that project and take a look at some of the goals that they've got in their README there. And you'll see some stuff about copy on write, which is going to be our approach to database branching.
Love it. All right, and we'll make this the last question as we are running over. We've a lot of great content today, and really excited to learn about all the great features Supabase offers alongside someone building on top of Netlify. So the last one here, another short one: is it possible to verify phone numbers for users if we don't use phone for sign up?
Yeah, so this is a form of multi-factor authentication, which is going to be a sneak peek, hopefully a big announcement in our next launch week. So you can't yet, but it's another item, I'm afraid, which I'll have to put a coming soon tag on.
All right. Well, you already got a lot on the platform today, and you have a lot more coming soon. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today. Hopefully, we're able to answer all your questions. Definitely check out that chat for some resources that we referred to. We will email you afterwards with those resources and a recording of this webinar. So, Ant, thank you again so much for dialing in from Germany. Love it what you guys are building. Love being a partner of yours. They're really excited to continue to grow with you into the foreseeable future to really support everyone that's building on top of the platforms. Connect with us via those QR codes in LinkedIn. You also can just shoot me an email, Steven@netlify.com.
Nice. We finished just in time because the sun's about to blind me, so good timing.
Yeah, it's about to hit that. Great, Ant. Have a good day. Have a good evening.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Stephen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.